Hey everybody, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to be doing some advanced Ruby on Rails front end using the Turbo and Stimulus.js frameworks, also collectively known as Hotwired. So this video is going to be a little bit different than my typical video because when I started this, I knew which feature that I wanted to work on inside my little stock journaling program that I'm calling Stonk Notes, but I wasn't exactly sure which specific features of Hotwired I wanted to cover. So I had to do some heavy research and problem solving along the way to get this feature working, and in so doing, that doesn't always make great screen capture tutorials. So what I'm going to do this time is I have the code already written, and I'm going to walk you through an overview of the code that I wrote and kind of show you how it's structured and present to you the special features that it makes use of in the Turbo framework. Now, I know this might be a little bit hard to follow along without being able to see the code yourself, and while I'm trying to do a good job presenting the code as we're talking about it, you can get the code yourself and play around with it by signing up for a subscription to my Patreon. And if you do that, all you have to do is send me a message and tell me what your GitHub username is, and I'll add you to the private GitHub repository where you could download this code yourself and clone the repo. Okay, so I'm going to get started now, and I'm going to show you an overview of how this feature is structured. So here's the latest version of the Stonk Notes journaling app, and the feature that I added in this video was the sidebar right here. So if I want to look at filter this on the left here for a particular ticker symbol, I could pull that up by clicking this, and then it'll pull up. So I want to do the spy, and it shows me all of the notes I made on different spy charts. Let's see if we're looking at like Netflix or something like that. We can see all the notes I made about Netflix, and when we scroll down here, yeah, you can see the load more flickering a little bit, and that's because I have it set up currently where every time you come down to the bottom of the list, it will try to initiate this load more button and load more notes. But as you can see, we're at the bottom of the list, and I haven't really figured out a better way to do this, but that's kind of how it works right now. Now, I have tickers, but I also have these hashtags that I put in my notes that kind of represent specific aspects of the chart that I'm looking at. And some of these were terminologies I used in the day trading chat rooms when I used to be doing that. And as you can see here on this menu bar, we could switch between tickers and tags. And I'm going to show you how to set that up here. So let's look at this upside break tab. And there we have the whole left here filtered for that particular setup. So I'm going to show you how this program is structured to get this menu bar to work. And in so doing, I had to make a few changes to the overall way that each section of this page loaded. So, for example, this whole left side here is called the Stonk Notes section, and this right side here is the sidebar, and it's kind of divided up that way by the Rails template that's being used. And within each of these sections, there's sub-templates, partials as they're called in Rails, that correspond to every little piece of the note, and it kind of breaks down that way. So I'm going to start out just describing the route path here, so we can figure out where that goes to by looking at our Rails routes. And the route path goes to home index. So we're in the home controller, and we're in the index action, which will render the index template. So I made a very important change here in the home controller. Previously, I had a query being made here in the index so that when you land on that page, it runs this query down here, producing a result. Here's what it is. It pulls up the first 20 items, And so by default, you have like the first 20 loaded here. But the problem that I had with it being set up that way before was if I wanted to make the filter for the load more, or make that filter more of a module or a component, you know, something that's reusable in other places, well, any time that I make a change to the way that the filtering works here on the left when you click this, I'd also have to make corresponding changes here in the index. So it wasn't really good design to have this try to do some sort of a partial load off the bat. Instead, what I did was I took this query and abstracted it to something a little bit more generic. So we got rid of all the code that was in the index. Let's see here. Oh wait, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. That's why it doesn't look right. Here's what it was. Here's that that code that pulled up the first 20 items. And I also modified the stonk notes controller, which we're going to look at next. But as you can see, and that's why I got kind of confused there, I was looking at the wrong set of changes, because I had very similar code here in home controller to what was in the stonk notes controller. But anyway, let's take a look at what happens when you try to render this index page. As I mentioned before, we have two sections here. We have the stonk notes section, which is the left where all the notes show up, and on the right we have that navigation bar. And here I call the turbo frame sidebar. And first, let's take a look at how the stonk notes section works. So we're going to drill down into there, and as you can see there, I have the stonk notes journal. This section here, as you can see, I have it tied to a stimulus controller using this data controller and data action, and this handles the load more trigger. And then this partial here, the form container, is the form for the new note button. And then here we get to the turbo frames. So I have a top level turbo frame here called the stonk notes feed, and within it I have other turbo frames. I have one for the stonk notes content and one for the load more button. Now notice here that by default, when this initially loads, it's going to have this H3 here that says loading, and you could briefly see that when we do a refresh on the page. There you see that loading sign pop up, and then it loads new notes. And also look at the requests here. So we have the index page loaded, and then it does a separate load for the actual stonk notes themselves. And the way that works is this SRC here, this source tag, that's actually specifying this turbo frame to be what's called eager loaded. And that basically just means that when this index page loads, we don't have any content here right now in the template, but it's going to run this secondary request to stonk notes path. And that's what you're seeing right here when you're loading, when it does a secondary request to stonk notes, is that when this page initially loads, it's going to try to make a request from this path to get the content. So let's take a look at where this stonk notes path leads to. So we go here to our routes, stonk notes, the resources, and the collection load more. So this collection is a special resource made called load more for loading more. And then stonk notes, because I have all the resources here specified, we're going to have our basic CRUD actions for create, show, destroy. All those will be available inside of the stonk notes controller. We can also see that in action by using our Rails routes command on the command line, and it'll show us what all the available routes are. So stonk notes, this prefix here, stonk notes path, will go to stonk notes index. So here we are in the stonk notes controller, and here's the index action. And what we got going on here is the stonk notes query result. That's similar to what I had there in the home controller index. And let's take a look at what the query was before here in the index. I had result being populated by like the full query that was right there, and I got rid of that, and instead I put this stonk notes query result, made a separate method so that it's the code looks a little bit cleaner that way. So if we go down here to the private methods, We can see the stonk notes query result. And as you can see here, I'm using active record filters. One of the relatively new Ruby features I'm using here is the .then enumerable method, which allows you to chain different commands together. Well, you can make a really long chain like this, and then whatever is inside of then gets executed and then returns the result of that execution. So I'm adding things onto my query here conditionally. So we have this conditional structure here with the question mark and the colon here. So if we have a cursor or we have symbol inside of the parameters for this particular request, it's going to go ahead and add that to the query being run. Now, instead of using then, what some people like to do is they'll like to take a variable and reassign it. So I could have just as easily written this way. Stonk note showing, and instead of the then, so what we do is we'd make a query temporary variable, and we'll do query equals whatever this is, if params cursor.present. And then likewise, they'd reassign query each time and then return query at the very end of the method. It's a matter of preference on what you like better, what you think looks cleaner. I don't like to reassign variables more than once. So I really like this then structure because I just think chaining these small conditionals looks very neat. Okay, so now we have this new load more filter. And what that does is it will set up some parameters for the next request. So that way when you're scrolling down, oops, I'll show you one that's really short here. Yeah, when we're scrolling down and we hit this load more button, as you can see, it's the end of the list, but here you could see the button. Normally this would be hidden because it'll be out of the view of the browser, and anytime you try to get near it, this will load more and populate more going down there, pushing the button further down. But let's take a look at the code for this. And as you can see, it's a form, and within this form we have these cursor symbol tags which tell it where to begin the next section of notes to display here, and that's what this is right here. So let's show you how this works in the template. So we get through the index method here, and there's actually two templates here. So if we're responding to a load more request, it's going to come as a turbo stream. But if this is just an initial request like that eager load, we're going to go to the HTML version. So here's the HTML version, and here's the turbo stream version. So we have index, stonk notes index, and stonk notes index turbo stream .slim. And so in the turbo stream, it uses turbo commands to replace what's in the load more form frame and stonk notes content frame. Let's go back here to the stonk notes section, see where those are corresponding to, and we have this turbo frame here, stonk notes content and stonk notes load more button. So these get replaced or appended to. So let's see. Oh, that's right. If you're doing an index, this does replace, and the turbo stream for the load more action doesn't append. That's right, because if you're landing on index, you want this to be fresh. So let me show you here. So the load more is triggered by this, which is very similar looking to index. But anyway, so this is the HTML version. This is the template that gets eager loaded. So like I say here, we have this call the stonk notes path right away when you load up this frame. So it's going to go to the stonk notes controller, try to get the HTML version of this. And then here's what's going to put inside of that stonk notes feed section. That's why I have it nested, is because this whole feed gets replaced if you're calling the HTML version, but if you're calling the turbo stream, it'll replace these individual stonk notes content and load more forms. Or it will add on to the stonk notes content. So one little improvement that I want to make here is I noticed that this locals here, start notes result, well, this is on the home index template. So we were on home index and this gets rendered and it tries to put a result here. But now when we go here, result's actually going to be blank because remember I removed that code that was right here. This code used to be here and I got rid of it. So there's actually nothing to render here. And inside of the template, the start note section template, I'm not making any references to that result variable anymore. So this is actually dead code, and we could go ahead and get rid of this. And, you know, I think dead code kind of happens in Ruby on Rails quite a bit. And the reason for that is that this is an interpreted language. There's no compiler that could run through all of the different scenarios and code paths and tell you what's being used and what's not being used and give you like a warning as you would get in TypeScript or something like that. In TypeScript, there's tools to get rid of unused stuff. But when you're dealing with Rails or Ruby, it's easy to miss stuff when you're making big changes like this and things are no longer being used hang around. So that's one thing that makes Ruby a little bit difficult to work with. So now I'm going to give you an overview of the sidebar. Let's take a look at the sidebar controller here. We're loading up home here. We have a turbo frame tag here for sidebar, and as you can see, sidebar is also eager loaded. And by the way, this is called eager loading. Be sure not to get it mixed up with another type of loading called lazy loading, which is actually very similar in practice, but the type of loading that we're doing here is we're making use of the eager loading feature. Lazy loading is for things that don't display right away, and it tells the browser to only load it once the thing becomes visible on the page. Okay, so this sidebar path gets eager loaded. So let's go to the sidebar controller. We have the index route here, and notice that I have index and tickers. These are very similar. So when you're loading up index, I wanted to run the tickers query and show you the list of tickers. I could probably abstract this and this a little bit better, but I was okay having a little bit of copy paste here. Here's the tickers query, and then if I wanted to do the tags, if we're on the tags page, each stonk note tag shows up differently. And how this data gets rendered into the HTML is we'll go to here, the sidebar. Here's the template that gets eager loaded and placed on that page. And then we go down here to tickers. Yeah, and remember, these look identical because index and tickers is identical. I probably could abstract this a little bit better, but if I wanted to abstract this, there's actually two ways that I could probably abstract these two templates. I could probably name a particular template to be rendered here, or I could probably have this, whatever this code is, in a partial and have it referenced, but I don't know, I'm okay with the way it is for now. Here, if we're doing tags, it's basically the same as the tickers except for tags. And then just to show you what the individual tickers looks like, so here's the contents inside of that section. So we have the navigation menu at the top, which is this right here, the navigation piece of it, and then we have the actual tickers themselves that appear below. Right now I'm just interested in looking at the tickers, and we have that show all link at the very top. And then it breaks down into individual ticker nav divs, and then this ticker nav goes to a helper called ticker nav, which builds the actual link. Now I want to show you an interesting thing that you could do here is, if you notice the way that it's currently running this, if we click on something, it will just load it up into the frame here. But let's say I want to have like a direct link to a particular item here. And I want to directly link to, let's say, the notes on Netflix stock and bookmark this page. I would just have to make the links a little bit different here. So the way that this link is set up is we have the data Turbo frame, and let's see here, it goes to the stomp notes path. I want to show you what this looks like. Okay, so here's what it looks like. We have this data Turbo frame right here, and then we have the actual link that it goes to. And what this does is it tells it to load it up as a Turbo data, and then it runs a Turbo stream here. So if we do navigation, actually we're going to do a navigation, and what we get back in the response is a Turbo frame. What does the header look like? Content type HTML. Okay, so it looks kind of like that. Well, anyway, so Turbo processes it a certain way and does a replace on this data on this data here, but it doesn't affect the navigation in the web browser. If we wanted it to affect the navigation, what we do is we'd set the target to top and treat it more like a regular link. So I'm going to get rid of this, and we're going to change this so that it goes to index, and we'll provide the symbol parameter here. So it's going to the main index, the root path index, instead of the stomp notes path, and it's basically going to refresh the entire page this way. And it's also going to do it with target equals top to let Turbo know that we don't want this to appear inside of a frame. I'm going to refresh this page, and now if we click one of these links, as you can see here, the navigation changed, and this is something that we could bookmark. See, this one, this show all here, it navigated within the Turbo frame. I didn't update the show all yet. Let's look at the show all button. Yeah, see, this is still navigating the Turbo frame, and we could have this just go to the root path. Now if we click this up, see, that's what happens when we don't have the top there. What it'll do is it'll try to stuff that what got pulled in here inside of the Turbo frame. What we need to do here is set the target to top. That should fix it. So we'll do that. We hit show all, and then there we go. It reloaded the entire page. So I hope you found this to be an interesting overview of some features of Ruby on Rails and Turbo, and putting together the whole works of your routes, controllers, and templates, and how that all plays together with Turbo frames. Notice that to do all of this stuff, all I had to do was Turbo and some configurations, and I didn't really have to do much with Stimulus. Stimulus.js is just there if I want to do something that's a little bit beyond Turbo's capabilities, but Turbo is quite a capable system, and if you know how to organize your templates to make optimal use of Turbo frames, there's a lot that you could do as far as like replacing sections of your web page. Give this video a like if you thought it was useful, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next video.